And so we will follow, and if I can get this on there for us. So the words will be on the screen for you there. Again, we will follow. So it's a song we've sung before. Perhaps you're familiar with the words, hopefully, but the words will be on the screen. To be able to follow you as Lord, and I do pray that you just continue to do that in each one of our hearts, in each one of our lives, as we look into your word, as we're experiencing fellowship with other believers as well, that you guide us on a path that would honor and glorify you, we pray. Thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, you can be seated. We'll turn over to hymn number 18. Hymn number 18, Oh, How I Love Jesus. Just so that we're all on the same page. We have a few announcements for you here tonight, similar to this morning. The VBS volunteers that are needed. You can look on the bulletin board in the back for that information. That's back there. And then the church work day, May 11th. So that's coming up this Saturday, and here at 9 o'clock, and really through the early afternoon there as well. And if people have to come and leave, maybe there's certain times that you're able to be here and certain times you're not able to be here. Obviously doing whatever is helpful, appropriate, that would be best, and that works for you. Again, as I've mentioned before, we have the suggestion box to communicate with the deacons. And so putting in one of these nice little red slips in the back there would be helpful to be able to communicate to the deacons. And also there's an opportunity to volunteer if you should happen to desire to do that. And a suggestion and other things, just communication there for us. Sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'll think of something and then I leave and I forget about it and I'll come back and I think about it again. Does anybody else do that? Is it just me? Okay. So this is just like a little helpful tool, to write it down. I can't remember how it was stated, something to the effect of, trusting a short pencil rather than a long memory or something to that effect. But putting one of those in there will be helpful probably for you, but also helpful for us so that we can get to those things in a timely manner, things that are needed to be dealt with. My wife talked to me about something recently, and I said, okay, good, I think maybe text somebody or something about that, so that was a little different, but those opportunities, those things to be able to get those out, because we think about these things and then we forget about them, but we obviously want to see those things taken care of and appreciate that. Okay. We have other announcements as well, and so we'll get to those here as soon as I can figure out. There's some other announcements anyway, and you can look online for those, I guess. So I don't know what button I pushed that got me out of this.
Is this on?
Yep, I think so. Sorry, technical difficulties here. I'm going to try and resolve it for us. Okay, something like that. There we go. All right. A couple of book study and fellowship. That's coming up as well, May 13th. So not this coming Monday, but the following Monday, 6 to 8 at church. And you can contact Holly or Brianna about food for that. And then Friday, May 17th, the Tweens activity. So 8 to 12, that opportunity there. Eric and Crystal are glad to be able to host that and stuff. And so it'll be at their house at 5:30, and dinner's provided for that. You can talk to Eric for more details if you'd like for that as well. And then the ladies' Bible study, May 24th. So I think that's the last Friday of the month, and that's at our house. So you can note that. And then May 26th, Mission Sunday. Gideon Kipkin is here in the morning. Am I saying that right, Kevin? Kipkin? Okay. All right. I almost misspelled it, so I was like, I got to make sure. Anyway. And then Sarah is here in the evening, and so we're looking forward to both of them, hearing from both of them, the ministries that God has entrusted to them. And so I encourage you to be here for those particular times. Then the Perspective Members Class, starting up beginning of June there, June 2nd, June 9th, and June 16th. So running about 3 weeks. I think that's what we've done before, and it seems to have worked well. Basically what we do is we go through the doctrines of the church, we go through the Constitution. We have an opportunity to ask questions. A lot of times I like getting into that, and we ask hard questions and try to answer hard questions, or I do a good job dodging the hard questions that are asked, and I'll get back to you later. Whatever the question may be, though, seriously, it's just an opportunity for us to discuss and remember what we're here, why we're doing it, why we're doing that according to what Scripture says. And so June 2nd, 9th, and 16th, even if you're not looking to join the church, I encourage you to be here to hear some of that as well and to ask questions as needed. And then the church picnic, June 2nd, at Glen Rock Park after the morning service. There will be no evening service that particular Sunday. So June 2nd, it's a little under a month away. And then Sarah's bridal shower on June 7th. Realize there's a number of announcements here for us, and sometimes we get lost in the announcements. So just know that you can go online to the website, and I try to keep that as updated as possible. So sometimes it's helpful if you are trying to think of something to go on there and just to double check it. So those things should be on there for us. All right, let's go ahead and stand and sing. We're actually going to sing a song that's in our hymnal, so you can turn your hymnal to hymn number 144. But it perhaps is not one you're as familiar with. We're trying to learn some of the different songs. And so we're going to try to maybe, how many of you are familiar with the song? You think you're familiar with it? Okay. Some maybe are. Why don't you go ahead and play through it once for us as you're finding 144, and we'll go ahead and stand. Venture into this. If nothing else, you can pay attention to the words, but we'll go ahead and sing this. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. and the rocks and rills, the sun and stars that shine. Wonderful riches no tongue can tell. He is my Father, so they're mine as well. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and that He will care for me. All right, you can go ahead and be seated. Let you off easy there tonight. Well, you turn your Bibles, if you would, to 2 Samuel 5. I'm going to be displaying some of the stuff here as well for us. Can you hear me okay? Does everybody hear me okay there? Is that good? Okay. I don't feel like it's very loud, but maybe that's just me. So 2 Samuel 5 here this evening. And we'll be looking at a few different passages, and I'll try to have some of them up here for us as well this evening. But I would encourage you, there's a few that I would definitely encourage you to open up to. Obviously welcome to do so for all of them, but 2 Samuel 5 here, I'm going to read just 5 verses for us, and a simple topic here tonight, a simple thought. We talked about a little bit of this on the Saturday men's prayer breakfast, and I want to kind of develop a little bit more as well and just add some other thoughts into this, and even to get some feedback as well, and I want to hopefully create some space for that even here tonight. All right, let's go ahead and open with a word of prayer, and then we'll look at our passage. Lord, we're thankful for just the opportunity to have your word, to be able to look into your word, and I do pray that you use your word tonight, even as we looked at this morning, to simply look through our thoughts and our hearts and our intents. Your word is alive, it's quick, it's powerful, and sharper than a two-edged sword. And so, Lord, I do pray that you just use your word here tonight, and even just input from other believers as well to challenge and encourage us and stir us to be able to accomplish all that you'd have for us, we pray. We thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. So here in 2 Samuel chapter 5, I'm going to read the first 5 verses for us, and it says this. It says, Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that leddest out and broughtest in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. And I think it's interesting here, just a few quick notes before we get into the specific topic tonight is, I love studying David's life, and there was a time at which we kind of went through a series looking at David's life, and it was very challenging to me to kind of just find the chronology of everything, and for instance, how old was David when David and Goliath happened, that particular story, and then how much time had elapsed between then and, this particular instance. And if I remember correctly, now I'm going off of some faulty memory, but I want to say like 8 to 10 years or more was what elapsed between the time that David and Goliath had occurred and this time here. And so we're talking about a number of years that he was running from King Saul, and it's interesting to kind of note some of those details in particular. But here he reigned in one particular location for 7 years and 6 months. The other location, for all of Israel, 33 years. So you have 40 years and 6 months total reigning time. So it definitely is a lot of time there. He started when he was 30 years old, as it mentions there. But there's some particular aspects here that I kind of want to zoom in on. This particular verse, in verse 2, I want us to see this verse and just get some thoughts about what exactly this is talking about. And so I'm really going to read it, and I'm going to ask some questions and hopefully get a little feedback. In verse 2 here, 2 Samuel 5, it says, And in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that leddest out and broughtest in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. The last full two phrases, I guess it is, thou shalt feed my people Israel, thou shalt be a captain over Israel. I'm going to start with that first phrase there. What exactly does that mean, thou shalt feed my people Israel? Any thoughts? Some people were there for men's prayer breakfast, and so maybe hold back just a little bit. Don't give us the answer quite yet. I'm in trouble. What does that mean? Let me just think about this. What do you think of when you think of the word feed? What do you think of? Feed. Okay, eat, right? Okay, eat food. How many of you think of food? How many think your favorite food? Okay, nobody consider your favorite food. Okay, feed. We oftentimes think, when we think of that word, we think of this idea of feeding and eating physically. And we're going to look at some other passages as well for this. But here, this word feed, we do think of that connotation. The word itself, they may have a different translations on it. Okay, I know you would have that as well. I'm not pointing you out for that. I'm just... oftentimes, if you do look in some other translations, and even the New King James Version, I believe as well, has the word shepherd instead of feed. And basically that's the idea or the connotation here. It's the verb of the noun shepherd. Okay, so I guess shepherd, what's the action for shepherd? It's shepherd. It's the same as the noun. But there you have the noun, and then you also have the verb here as well. So you have this idea of feeding. And so really, how was David then supposed to accomplish this for God's people? What does that look like for David?
He's feeding spiritual, not food.
Okay, so not physical food, maybe spiritual food. Okay, so spiritual food. So a feeding spiritually. Okay, any other thoughts? Good.
Protection.
Okay, protection. All right, obviously incumbent perhaps on his position that God had given to him as king over the nation. Yeah. It was funny because I thought to myself, I'm just thinking out loud with some of this, but I thought to myself, what did Samuel say about the kings to Israel before they had a king? Does anybody remember some of the thoughts that were there? I think it's in 1 Samuel 8. You can turn there and get some thoughts if you want. What were some of the things that Samuel warned them? He warned them about, because he was told by God to warn them. He said, if they want a king, that's fine. Give them a king. But warn them severely. Because it's not going to be, it's not going to be really what you want in the end of it all. And of course, we saw that not too long ago when we looked through 1 Samuel and some different things there. But 1 Samuel 8, you can turn back, I guess, with me, just to give us some perspective there. I don't have that up there for us, sorry. But Israel demands a king here in 1 Samuel 8. And as there is discussion back and forth, Samuel is actually really displeased with this. He kind of takes it personally in verse 6. It says there, but the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, so he was very frustrated about this originally. And as you look through this passage, there's numerous things that are basically given by Samuel that the king would expect. And most of them actually talk about the king consuming goods, not giving goods. Okay? As you go down through this and you read down through it, he's going to take your sons in verse 11. He's going to appoint them captains, etc., over his army, to reap his harvest, to bring in food for them as well. In verse 13, he's going to take your daughters to be confectionaries, to be cooks, to be bakers. He's going to take your fields. Okay? It just goes on and on and on, and he's going to have different, from each one of the tribes, he's going to take a portion. He's going to take a tenth of this and taxes for this. So it's all of these kind of things taking place. And so Samuel kind of sets this out for the people. So as we look back at our passage, I look at this and I think it's a little bit interesting that it says that David is going to be feeding the people, when really it's quite opposite, right? Aren't the people then feeding King David or whoever's king? They're giving goods, they're doing all sorts of things to basically prop this up, as it were. You know, that's how it was going to work. And Samuel made that very clear in the forefront. So I'm getting us to think a little bit tonight, rather than just giving a bunch of answers, and I'll try to give answers at a point, but I want us to think about this particular aspect. What does it mean to feed? What does that mean? It has a spiritual idea, connotation, and protection. Anything else? I'm going to, somebody else say something. Educate? Okay, maybe an education aspect. Sure.
Set an example.
Set an example, okay. I mean, he didn't always do the best job, but yes, he was supposed to set the example. I would agree with you on that.
How are we going to do there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's the man after God's own heart. I mean, obviously he's not perfect, and none of us are. And I think that's the thing to recognize is, you know, we all fall short of that. But he still is the man after God's own heart, you know, even with that. And so sometimes I can take a little bit of, I'm grateful for that, because I can associate with mess-ups, right? A lot easier to associate with perfection. Not that I wanted him to do that, but okay, anyways. Going on further, I'm going to look at another passage that's a parallel passage to this that kind of really says about the same thing. In 1 Chronicles 11, verses 1 through 3, it's a parallel passage to this, and it says, "Then all Israel gathered themselves to David to Hebron, saying, Behold, we are the bone and thy flesh, and moreover in time past, even when Saul was king, thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel." There is some shepherding aspect to that, where he was leading the people. And it says, "And the Lord thy God said unto thee, Thou shalt feed my people, Israel, and thou shalt be ruler over my people, Israel." Okay, so the only difference between this and the other passage is ruler instead of captain, or captain instead of ruler. That's really the only difference between these two in that particular phrase at the end there. And then it goes on to talk about that a little bit more, how they anointed David king over Israel according to the word of the Lord by Samuel. Okay? Now I'm going to flip to a New Testament passage. And I challenge you to come here with me, because I want us to kind of think about this a little bit. And I think we're going to have some thoughts, and we're going to come back to this. But 1 Peter 5 is a passage I often go when I think about this in particular. Now, to recognize there are some clear differences between a king and an elder, as it were, but there are also some very, very interesting similarities. And this is what I'm going to kind of talk about here tonight. In 1 Peter 5, I'm going to read verses 1 through verse 4 for us. I'll also have those on the screen. It says, "The elders which are among you I exhort, to whom also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples or samples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, he shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away." So here in 1 Peter 5, there is that idea of feeding the flock of God. Now, David in 2 Samuel 5, verse 2, was supposed to feed Israel. Okay, he's going to feed my people Israel. And here we have something similar, and similar terminology. In fact, while the New Testament is written in Greek and the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, there is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, and the word used to translate the Hebrew word for shepherd or feed is the same exact word that we find here in our text, okay? So just understand that there's multiple ways to look at this, whether you go from Hebrew to Greek to this Greek passage. It'd be the same word, basically, or the understanding of those that are doing the translating are understanding it to be the same word. But also the same thing is true of the translators, even into English, because they use the same word feed here and the same word feed back in 2 Samuel 5. Okay, so there's clearly some link to these two concepts and ideas. In fact, I would submit to you that 1 Peter 5, verse 2 would probably better be translated, shepherd the flock of God. In its context, as you continue reading, there is a clear connection to under shepherd and chief shepherd. As you look at verse 4, it talks about being the chief shepherd. Christ is the chief shepherd. He's the one that shepherds us all, but some of us have responsibilities to shepherd other people as well. For instance, I challenge the men in men's prayer breakfast that each one of them are the shepherd of their own home. Before God, they have a responsibility to shepherd their own home. Okay? Now, does that mean that others don't have a responsibility to come alongside to help or in that process? And obviously we trust that we can do that. But there's a responsibility that God places on the man in the home that he's supposed to shepherd his home. So here there's a responsibility placed on the elders of the church, just like there was a responsibility placed on the king in the Old Testament, particularly David, to shepherd the individuals that God has placed under their care. Now my question is, again, what does that word shepherd or feed mean? I understand it can mean a lot of different things, and here's another verse that will probably only complicate matters, but I'll bring it in anyway. Acts 20:28 says this, "Take heed therefore unto yourselves to all the flock over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers." What does it say? To feed the church of God, which he hath purchased with his own blood. Okay, same terminology, to feed the church of God. And I think you can see both in that passage and even in the 1 Peter 5, if you're still here, I want to submit to you tonight that there's two specific aspects to feed. At least two. Okay, I'm not saying there could be more, but at least two. In 1 Peter 5, verse 2, it reminds us to take the oversight thereof. Shepherding is oversight of a flock. It's leading them where they need to go. Yes, there's the aspect as well of protecting. That's a part of that whole mindset of protecting the sheep from that, from those predators or those that might come in. But oversight specifically is mentioned here in 1 Peter 5, which again includes that. I think there also is an aspect of a spiritual feeding of sorts, as was mentioned as well. But the two in particular that I want to clue in on is oversight. And then the second one in verse 3, it says, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being what? To the flock. What does it say in 1 Peter 5:3? Being what? And samples to the flock. There's two particular aspects that feeding, and I'm not saying that's the only thing. I'm not trying to just say this is the only thing, but clearly biblically these are two major things that are talked about in this passage, is oversight and ensample, for example. So our life ought to, what we do in our life ought to teach a message or preach a message, but also how we watch over those that are under our care as well. I'm going to turn over to Acts, to that passage, because I this last week was studying that just a little bit as well. It's kind of funny because some of these different things kind of coming together here, particularly tonight. That Acts passage in Acts 20:28, I noted several aspects of, or spheres of watchfulness. In Acts 20:28 it says, take heed therefore unto who? What does it say? Yourselves. So that's one aspect of watchfulness, right? Isn't it the Apostle Paul who said in 1 Corinthians, he said, I keep under my body rein in subjection. Why? Lest that when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Now, does that mean we're going to be perfect? Okay, probably not, unfortunately. I would love to say it means we're going to be perfect. But even the Apostle Paul recognized in Philippians 3, in verse 15, it says, if you be otherwise minded, God's going to reveal this unto you. If you mess up, God obviously is the chief shepherd looking over you, but there is an aspect in which all of us, before God, need to, and particularly elders, as it's mentioned here, take heed therefore unto yourselves. Making sure that you're doing what God wants you to do. It's a personal watchfulness. Take heed therefore unto yourselves, that personal watchfulness. But then it goes on to that public watchfulness and to all the flock. So it extends that. So if you can, in your mind's eye, if you can kind of have a circle, and then with that circle, you're the one in the very, very middle of that circle. Okay, the very middle of that circle is take heed therefore unto yourselves. If you lose For instance, in this illustration, if you lose the middle, if you lose yourself, it's going to be very hard to do anything else, right? If you were in the wrong perspective, or the wrong place personally, it's going to be very hard to watch over the flock because you're not where God wants you to be. So there's the personal, there's the public, but it goes on further, and as you look down through this as well, a little bit further it says, over which the Holy Ghost hath made you overseers. This pastoral or shepherd watchfulness that's there. It says to feed the church of God, and yes, involving or an aspect of the preaching and teaching and other aspects, but it's not only or solely that. Think again, coming back to this, there's an oversight that's mentioned in 1 Peter 5, and also an example. As it goes on further in this passage, though, it also helps clarify some different things, and I'm going to keep reading for us. It says, for I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch, and remember that by the space of 3 years I cease not to warn every one night and day with tears. And now, brethren, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among all them that are which are sanctified. So here we have in this passage this aspect of watchfulness. And really I want to, there's a lot I'd like to say about the Acts 20 passage and the 1 Peter 5, but I'm going to go back to the 2 Samuel 5 passage. And I don't think I have any more there for us, so we're going to have to navigate here together. But 2 Samuel 5, this particular passage coming back here and asking these two questions. Did David, or how did David provide oversight? And did David, or how did David provide an example? Anybody have any thoughts on the first one? Oversight. Leading God's people. How did David do that? Or did he do that? Did he fail at this? This is what God gave him to do, and it's a simple thing, thankfully. Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be captain over Israel. But I think there's a lot to it. So how did David provide oversight? Anything that comes to mind?
I think it's a trick question.
Is it a trick question?
That's probably what they meant.
Yeah,
Okay.
could be. I think about this. This is the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking of oversight. One of the first aspects, I'm not saying there's not others, but if you turn to 2 Samuel 7, I think some of it really is a mixture of both. In 2 Samuel 7 here, King David, having gone through, obviously, uniting of the kingdoms, finally, because of that, then there's a war with the Philistines that comes. That is prosperous. Then David goes and gets the ark in chapter 6 and brings that back. There's a whole fiasco about that, but finally he does bring that back. And in 2 Samuel 7, it starts out here, I'm going to read verse 1 and following here, it says, And it came to pass, when the king sat in his house, and the Lord had given him rest round about from all his enemies, that the king said unto Nathan, the prophet, See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwelleth within curtains. And Nathan said to the king, Go and do all that is in thine heart. So here Nathan, our king, is talking to Nathan, and he says, Look, I'm dwelling in this house. I'm grateful now for the rest that God has given. I am glad to have the enemies of God subdued. But here I sit in this wonderful palace, this wonderful house, and I just think to myself about God's house, and I think it's just there. It's a house of cedars. And so Nathan then says to him in verse 3, he says, do what's in your heart. God's placed something in your heart, so go ahead and do that. So verse 4, it says this, And it came to pass that night, But the word of the Lord came unto Nathan, saying, Go and tell my servant David, Thus saith the Lord, Shalt thou build me an house for me to dwell in? Whereas I have not dwelt in any house since the time that I brought up the children of Israel out of Egypt, even to this day, but have walked in a tent and in a tabernacle. In all the places wherein I have walked with all the children of Israel, spake I a word with any one of the tribes of Israel, whom I commanded to feed my people Israel, saying, Why build ye not me an house of cedar? Now therefore, so shalt thou say unto my servant David, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I took thee from the sheepcote, from following the sheep to be ruler over my people over Israel. And I was with thee, whithersoever thou wentest, and have cut off all thine enemies out of thy sight, and have made thee great name like unto the great men that are in the earth. Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them, and they will dwell in a place of their own, and move no more, neither shall the children of Israel, children of wickedness, afflict them any more as before time. So he goes on to talk about this more, and obviously the fact that, to build a house in my name. Then he talks to David about, I'm going to establish your throne forever there in verse 14. And so this goes on, and eventually David is glad to be able to try to build this house. And then the word of the Lord comes to him and basically says, you can't build the house personally yourself. And of course he's probably disappointed because he's all excited and he wants to do this, and he's excited about it, he's starting to do different things. And so when God tells him that he can't do it, he doesn't just sit there and pout. You notice what he does? Does anybody remember what does David do? Okay, he prepares for it, right? He's preparing for it. He recognizes, okay, God doesn't have this for me to do, but there's plenty of things that need to be done for this to be accomplished. So he goes in there and he starts to gather all of these materials. I mean, you're talking about all sorts of materials. And you're talking about all sorts of chapters here as well. I'm not going to go through all the different details. But he gathers all of these materials together to build this house. He's looking forward to the future, and he's providing oversight. In fact, I think a little bit later he talks about Solomon not being able to, be later on in his lifetime, that he was basically young, that he wouldn't be able to do this, and so he gathers some of the materials, finally then kind of hands that project off to Solomon with this thought. He says, I can't do it. God told me I couldn't do it because of the fact that my hands were full of blood, but you can. Here's everything that I've provided for you so that you can just move forward and do this. So I guess what I'm saying is David was busy looking out for the future of the nation of Israel, of God's house, of the future leader. He was paying attention to all these different details, and he was trying to do some specific things towards that end to get things ready, even though he couldn't do things himself. So he provided some oversight to that particular project. And I think there's many other ways in which he provided oversight. I think if you were to look through David's life as a whole, you'd find many different aspects of David providing oversight. But that was one in particular that kind of came to mind. And I challenge you to kind of study that out some more, to be able to read some of those things as well. But oversight. Then secondly, what about example? Let's go to example.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the time that he asked if there was anyone left in Saul's family, and he showed kindness to
Mephibosheth? Yeah. And
then also when he sinned, he did a terrible sin with Bathsheba, but he admitted it. And he said, I have sinned against the Lord.
Yeah.
So it's not like he tried to hide it then, or...
Yeah. So those are two particular aspects of an example we left for Israel. And we could, obviously you look at the one and you're like, well, you shouldn't have left that example, but you did leave a positive. Can I say it this way? I think of that in particular, because sometimes it is that, I think, we mess up around coworkers, your others, neighbors, family members, friends. We say things we shouldn't, or we do things we shouldn't, whatever. And we all do that, okay? Don't sit here like you have never done any of those kind of things. Okay, we all do these kind of things, right? So that happens, but you know what? I think what's interesting is we have a golden opportunity to make that right. It's actually an opportunity. Look at it what it is, because it's an opportunity to, by God's grace, make that right. And those are individuals who probably never have anybody come to them and say, hey, I was wrong, I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that. I mean, they're like, what got into you? Like, why'd you say that? I mean, and so you look at that, and that does provide an example, because doubtless there were many people in Israel probably who chose to sin. But he provided a positive example of mourning over that. You know, you have Psalm 51, I believe it's Psalm 32, if I remember correctly. Different psalms that he wrote about that. And those psalms undoubtedly were sung. I mean, it was a public thing. Obviously his sin was public, but also was his contrition about that sin as well. And so that was matched there. Very good. Very good thoughts, examples. What was the other one you mentioned? I'm sorry. I'm not sure.
The kindness to.
Okay, kindness to Mephibosheth.
I think he was crippled, wasn't he crippled?
Yeah, he was crippled, he was lame from the feet. I think basically what happened there is somebody grabbed him quickly and left, you know, when everything happened with King Saul and stuff, because they were afraid that they would die, and so he dropped them, and so he became lame. So, yep, so kindness there. Even kindness actually to King Saul himself and to Jonathan. I mean, that's going to be in the devotional this week, by the way. But at the beginning of 2 Samuel, he shows kindness and mourns and weeps and different things there. And specifically, I mean, that boggles my mind still, because I think to myself, this is somebody who hunted you and wanted to kill you for about 10 years or more. I mean, this isn't somebody that's a friend. This isn't somebody that's, you know, even a loose acquaintance. This is somebody who wanted to do you harm at every turn. So he did provide an example of how to deal with that. So it's good. Any other example things? Any other examples that stick out to you, David's life?
This is, I guess you'd call this an example, that when he turned over the plans to Solomon for the temple, when he turned over all that, this phrase always, it just stuck to me, and he says to Solomon, be courageous and act. And I think about God's word, and God has given us a job to do. He's given us the word. I think about that phrase, be courageous and act. We should take that advice.
And even how he left an example, and so sorts to his son in that, you know, be courageous and act, do what God wants you to do. There were numerous things he did throughout his time that could have gotten a lot of feedback in a negative way, but he did those things everywhere because that's what God wanted to do. Sure. Okay. Any other example things? Anything else that sticks out to you about David's life, especially as king? So drop on you.
I guess two more things that I would think of
Sure.
is, you know, David's a king. I mean, I liken it to like a political figure nowadays. Like, how great would it be to hear Trump say, no, I did mess up. I was, you know, committed adultery.
Sure.
But and repent, have a true repentance, you know. But for David, it was, first of all, his love for Jonathan, you know, was like a strong love between two men that, you know,
Yeah.
today when we think of that, our
Yeah,
minds
and
go other
you go
places,
places
but that
you
wasn't
go.
the
But yeah.
case. And then, just that, I lost that one thought.
No, that was a good one. It actually prompted me to think of this too with, how about the example of David to accept the consequences of his actions? To bear them gracefully. I mean, think about what was said early on. I mean, this is early on in his reign here in 2 Samuel 12, where, you know, obviously he sins, and then Nathan comes to him and says, you've sinned. And he said, yes, I've sinned. You know, he agrees with that, he understands that. But then it's not like that agreeing with the fact that he had sinned took away all the consequences of the sin. Remember what happened because he did this? Obviously there were consequences that literally were lifelong for him. His entire family was ravaged. The things that he did basically took place in his own family, and his own family members did to each other. And so but I guess I would say this is, consider with me how many people in doing that would go, well, that's just too much, God, I'm not going to serve you anymore. I mean, how many Christians would turn away from God because of the consequences of their own actions and their own sin and say, well, you're going to treat me like that? But David doesn't. David has I think he wrote many of the Psalms later on in his life. Many of the Psalms that we see, he wrote later on in his life and had a closer relationship to the Lord because of that. And so, anyway, I mean, I look at that, and that's something that I remember talking to somebody quite a while ago, and they were really frustrated because they feel like, I've been forgiven, so why is all this bad stuff happening? But there was the understanding from this passage that I communicated to them, well, that doesn't, just because you've been forgiven, and God can forgive you in a moment, that doesn't mean that it wipes away all the consequences. We want to reset in life many times, but God allows those consequences to continue to chastise us and to even bring us back to himself. And David, I think it just shows David's heart, his true heart. Because he didn't turn away from God, he turned to God. And so I think that's an example as well that was given in that sense. Did you remember the other one?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about his son, who, I think he actually tried to kill him, didn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah, Axel. And yet he was so sorrowful. And once again, you think of this king, this great man, and he wasn't afraid to show sorrow,
Yeah. And, obviously that whole situation, when he was fleeing too, Shimei comes out and curses him, and one of the men says, I'm going to go up and kill him, and I'm going to take his life. And David says, just leave him alone. Just leave him alone, let him curse. It's like maybe God will do good to us because of what he does and what he says. And there was a time at the end of his life when he kind of made a list of different things that Solomon needed to accomplish because of some things. And that was one of those things that kind of got on that list is, Shimei did this, it was wrong. He does need to reap for his own actions. And so there was that on the list for Solomon, along with many other things. But some examples there of how to bear gracefully even the issues of his own sin. Some of that as well. So, any other thoughts?
I remember he put on sackcloth and ashes when his child was sick.
Okay.
So too, that's a humbling thing and he did before the people.
Yeah.
And then when the child died, he went and ate. And they all thought, what's wrong with him?
Yeah.
But he knew he couldn't do anything at that point about it, so he was good.
Yeah. And showing an example there too, obviously, like you said, that humility and that almost disgracing himself, as it were, in that position. But obviously recognizing that he's kind of brought this on too, and realizing that he's kind of looking at the mercy of the Lord for that. But yeah, the servants we're talking about, like, should we even tell him or not? Because how's he going to respond? What's he going to do? Is he going to, what's going to happen here? I don't want to be the one. And it's like he overhears them talking, and I don't even think it says in the passage that he heard what they were saying. I think he just understood or knew what they were talking about. And so because of that, like you said, he put off his clothes. And even in that, can you see a submission to God's will? Look, I prayed for this. God is merciful. He does these kind of things where he responds, but he chose not to. I'm going to submit myself to that. Maybe it's not something he wanted. Clearly, he didn't want it. But you see time and time again some of these different glimpses and see a picture of David, obviously, as the man after God's own heart. Anybody else have any example? The last one I think of, I guess I'll end with this, is again, coming back to his confession of sin in 2 Samuel 12. I remember doing a message where I contrasted, because it was interesting to me. It's like, okay, so why is King Saul not the man after God's own heart? And why is David the man after God's own heart? Why is this the case? There's clearly something here. And I don't know that this is the only issue, but I do see it as a clear difference between King Saul and King David. Is King Saul was confronted in 1 Samuel 15. He was confronted about his sin over and over and over. It wasn't just once. Samuel says, you're doing this. And he's like, no, you don't understand. Like, we're doing it because of this. You know, and then, I'm fearing the people. And he's going down the list of excuses he's given. But you see the complete opposite in David here. He doesn't give excuses. He just said, yes, you're right, I'm wrong. That's it, we're done. And that was, it's a marked difference between King Saul and King David. And I think it was really a part of the aspect of the fact that God saw him as the man after God's own heart. I think it's a part of it. Maybe not the whole thing, but I clearly see it as a part of that aspect. His contrition. And as it says in Psalm 38, I believe it says, a broken and contrite heart, O God, thou wilt not despise. And I think David understood that. And he understood and had that relationship with God. I know I said last one, but I think of the many Psalms that David wrote. Many of them are very, very public. Many of them were sent to be sung in public. And that definitely is an aspect of an example before God's people, before Israel there. I think of even the example that we set by doing that for future generations. Think of how King David was willing to speak of God publicly. He was willing to declare God. And I think something that I'm just going to challenge us all with is to be that kind of individual here, even at Grace Bible Church, that we'd be willing to, as God gives us opportunity to, speak about God publicly. I'm not saying here tonight or whatever, I'm not trying to rebuke necessarily. I'm just saying, like, to have that opportunity to be able to speak publicly about God because, and I say it for this reason, because future generations are watching and listening. That was something that in the Old Testament, the children of Israel were supposed to do well. They were supposed to pass the truth from one generation to another, and they were given reasons and ways in which to do that, and they didn't do that. And because they didn't do that, future generations failed because they did not transfer that truth. And so David does do that. He does a very good job of that, and it's a challenge and encourage to all of us. I really want to just challenge us all to whatever realm God gives us to be able to feed or to shepherd. Perhaps it is as a father to shepherd your family. Perhaps it is as a mother, even shepherding your children in a sense. Obviously that all starts with, as Acts 20:28 says, to shepherd yourself first, to take oversight of your own life first, make sure that relationship between you and the Lord is right first, but then to move on to being used by God to shepherd others as well. And David does that many different ways, but I think the two particular ways is the oversight that he has and the example he gives us as well. So just a few thoughts there, and trust that it can be helpful, maybe stimulating, or perhaps encouraging. Maybe it means that you need to get into the scripture a little bit about this and kind of think through. What does it mean that David was or gave oversight? What does it mean that he gave an example? And how can we do those things as well here with those over which we are responsible? So just want to challenge you with that simple thought and trust that it will be helpful for all of us. Okay, let's close the word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I'm thankful for the fact that you give us through your word the opportunity to be able to see, even as we saw a little bit tonight, not just the perfections of those biblical saints, but also the mess-ups, as it were, the choices to sin and the consequences thereof. And Lord, I think passage grace, it can be the beginning of trusting you anew, and the opportunity to be able to show future generations individuals who are willing to move forward in their relationship with you. And Lord, I pray that you help each one of us as well to take the oversight, the realms of responsibility that you give to us, starting with ourselves, but moving on to the children and others that you've entrusted to our care. Lord, I pray that you do that work in our midst, that only you can do, as your word says in Matthew 16:18, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And Lord, I pray that you just continue to do that work in our midst, that you challenge, that you encourage each one of us to be a part of that work actively, to be able to trust you, we pray. In Jesus' name.